Continuing on in Chapter 9, examining point data objects, we finished discussions about site, about peton. What we're going to do now is discuss transect. And in order to do that, if you followed through and were paying attention, you'll notice that I had used a query called author name and user site ID. I'm going to switch now, go to the one that says peton site transect by author series and user peton ID. The reason being is that now transect is part of this query. And so by default, when I downloaded all this data, if there were any transects available to me, then the transects came with the data from the national database and stored in my local database. And so the only thing I have is that set of information I downloaded. So I'm going to go ahead and use wildcard characters just to load up all of the transects. And I don't know what the classification types on all of these were. This particular parameter isn't necessary. So I'm going to go ahead and select everything. I'm going to say run it. And so there are 8 transects that are available to me on this set of data. So I'm going to say yes, I want them added. So I've now got this, all of these transects. So I've run the query, I've loaded up the transects. Now I'm going to come over here to the tables, and I'm going to open up the transect table. And here are the transects. Now I haven't looked at this, so it's going to be interesting to see what data we've got here. And obviously not much of any data. But I will say that historically none of these tables existed when this data was actually populated. But the point is that what I wanted to do was to show, and that was a control minus, by the way, to close that out, to show you what's in the transect table. Once again, best fit all columns. And you'll see that the only thing you're doing is you're identifying a user transect ID. Now, there is no method of, no need for a consistent methodology for user transect IDs because they're not applied nationally. We don't really worry too much about how you're populating your user transect ID. However, remember that if it's not connotative in some form or fashion, it's not going to do you any good to be able to query. Now, here's an example where TX 622.121.02. I have no idea when this was done. I can identify that that was a survey area. Here's one that's a transect. Is 2010 TX 625.59. That one's a pretty good connotation. I can see that that was 2010 TX 625 was the survey area. This may have been the 59th one that was done. Good idea. I like that. Okay. Now, here's the author of the transect. The kind. Is it a random point? Is it an interval? I'll go ahead and check this out. Show you the differences in the choice list. I think there's only 2 choice lists. There is. And then is it biased or is it random? And then what was the delineation size of the transect? What direction did you go? And then what is your certification status? Did somebody literally certify this and say, hey, this is a good one or not? Now, once you've identified your transect and you've populated your transect ID, then you can, as I told you earlier, when you bring in all of your point data and you start entering your peton data, I'm going to come over here to the transects, and that is when you come in and you set up your transect. You can populate your transect and you can identify this was stop number 1, stop number 2, and stop number 4. So I hope that gives you a good handle on the fact that if you're going to run a transect and you're going to enter all your peton data, go ahead and set your transect up first, and then go in and populate your sites, populate your site observation, populate your petons, and when you're in your petons, since the transect's already been set up, you then have the ability to begin the population of that data for those transects. And you don't have to go back and touch it a second time. And this is the reason why. You've got a choice list. You've already identified what your transects are. You can very easily go in here and populate your transect information. Keep it in mind. All right, the next one that we're going to discuss, and I'm going to go ahead and open up the table, is the site association. Now, site associations are a little unique. Transects we've set up to identify composition. They're, basically an interval point, and we have a number of points within a particular polygon that we've collected. Site associations are a little different, and I'm going to come down here and try to do this on live. I'm using another query. This one's sites by site association. I did not download any site association, so I'm going to have to go to a national query. And I'm going to come in here and type in irrigation. The only reason why I'm doing this is because I knew years ago I had created a site association for a project that I was working on that was dealing with irrigation. And here is the irrigation studies that I was working on. It looks like Steve Gowan's done an irrigation study. So I'm going to go ahead and accept these and try to explain to you how a site association can be used to manage your your point data, pardon me. So I've got them loaded up. Let's go back to the local database, and you can see I've got irrigation studies. So I'm going to key in on PRF because they're mine, and I'm going to rerun the query, and I'm going to load up site association. I've already got the sites and the pedons, so I'm going to do a PRF star. Whoa, wow, something's wrong here. What happened? Well, remember the way a query is actually run. This particular query has sites and pedons associated with it. So then the question then becomes, why didn't I load up any data? I'm gonna, oh, pardon me, that's not what I wanted to do. I want to run this against the national database again. And I want to show you that it helps to read the descriptions. You have to run this thing twice. And the first run is to grab the site association. The second run is to grab the pedon data. And so now I click on pedon, and remember, now I get the pedons, the sites, and the transects. And so I come in here and I do a PRF because that was the name of the site association that I showed you. I got the site associations, but because of the links, the site association, and I'm going to show this to you again, site association only loads the site association and the site. I need the pedons. So in order to do that, I chose pedon, but it's going to still go to the site association and find all those that are PRF. And I'll run this. And so now, let's see if I can sort this so that you can see. Here's all the pedons that are associated with that particular site. So we're going to go ahead and accept this. Okay, returning back, you'll now notice I've got all of these as local. So I'm pretty good to go. I know I've got my site, pardon me, my site associations are going to be in here. So we are going to come, remember, this is my selected set. Here's my local database, site associations. Here's my selected set, site. Okay, I can now run this and I can say, give me my site association, give me my sites, and give me my pedons, and give them to me that are all started with PRF. There are 2 site associations. I think I showed that to you in the local database. Then there are 40 sites and there are 40 pedons. Now you see the importance of reading those descriptions whenever you run a query to be able to identify how many times you have to run it and how do you have to run it. So I've got my data loaded, and I'm going to go ahead and minimize my Explorer panel so we can discuss this. Now, I think if you picked up on it when I ran the query, a site association is linking sites, and that's the reason why the target table showed site association and sites. And the second time I ran the query was to load up the pedons associated with those particular site associations. So when I open up the pits, what you'll notice is here all of the associated sites. These are all the sites that I have in this irrigation study for the pits. So each one of these were a pit in 2000 in Kansas, in 055 and 09 and 193, 081. And so I've linked all of these sites that I sampled to this site association so that I can rapidly come in here and identify all of those associated with this. So I come over to my sites and close out my filter here, and I can now come down here and notice here are all the pits. Okay, well, you know, this really is too complicated for me to be able to analyze. I've got more data here than what I need, so I'm going to come back over here and I'm going to highlight that entire table, and I'm going to remove these from the selected set. Pardon me. Come back over to site association. I'm going to highlight this list of pits, and I'm going to say load the related sites. And now when I come back over to the site table, here are those pits. And so here's the information, very easily, very rapidly identified. None of these pits are associated with a particular transect. These were pits within a variety of different counties. And those different counties, I wanted to be able to say these are one associated set of research that I was doing. And I want to be able to group these together so that I can query them at any time. Now keep in mind, this is 13 years later, and I can now come in here and still bring these pits back in, these 8 pits together, and I can now very easily take those same descriptions and then analyze this data even now, 13 years later. So that's pretty cool. That's a site association. It allows you to group sites for a specific reason, and then allows you to manage it so that you can load up those particular sites. Now those sites also have pedons, and I could come in here and keep in mind I've got a lot of pedons. So I'm going to do the same thing just to show you how this can be easily analyzed. I'm going to clear everything out of the pedon table. I'm going to remove them from the selected set. They're still in my local database. Okay, and I'm going to come back over to the site associate observation. Keep in mind, this is the sequence that we started in. Here's the site association. Here are all my sites. I go over to my sites, and here's all my sites. But remember, what links the site to the pedon? What links it is the site observation. So now I opened up my site observation table, independent of my site table, because that way I can highlight all these records. And I can then load the related pedons. And I can say, okay, I want these 8 pedons. And here's those 8 pedons that I just showed you. Pretty slick, isn't it? Thing is, you got to understand the relationships in the databases. And that's what those diagrams are for, try to help you out. And then here we can then open up and we can look at the actual pedon horizon and the way these were sampled. I realize this is a complicated method, but this in a video allows you to go back over it and review what I've talked about and give you some sense of being able to handle this complicatedness. But the point is, we've talked about the sites, we've talked about the pedons, we've talked about transects, and we've talked about site associations. And in between time, I've tried to explain to you some of the linkages and using pedon for your queries to be able to pull in your sites and your transect information, because pedon is that common denominator between the site and the transect. The site association allows you to group sites that are not within a transect. These are research sites. These could be your soil health sites. These could be your dynamic soil property sites. And you want to bring this dynamic soil property, and that's particularly what this one was about, was what is the impact on irrigated and non-irrigated soils. what does irrigation change on our soils. So you can see that what I've done is said I want to be able to come back later and manage these so that I can load them all up at one time. So my site association loads up my sites, and then I go in and I load up my pedons that are associated with those sites, and I now can do a review and an analysis of how this data came to be. So I hope this helps you out. Try to understand this point data, and that'll end the Chapter 9 examining point data objects, and we'll move on. Thanks a lot.